We are very honored to welcome as our guest speaker today Rabbi Dr. Alon Goshen-Gottstein. He is the founder and has been director of the Elijah Interfaith Institute since 1997. With offices both in Israel and here in the United States, the Institute has evolved into a global gathering of premier religious figures and scholars. Rabbi Dr. Goshen-Gottstein's work bridges the theological and academic dimension with a variety of practical initiatives, especially involving world religious leadership. Acknowledged as one of the world's leading figures in interreligious dialogue, his contribution to the field has been recognized by the Polish Council of Christians and Jews, which conferred upon him the title Figure of Reconciliation. Ordained a rabbi in 1978, he attended the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, with a concentration in the fields of Talmud and Jewish thought. He also studied at Harvard University and received a PhD from the Hebrew University of Jerusalem in 1986. Rabbi's spiritual education has included formative relations with non-Jewish spiritual masters and in-depth relations with a broad range of Christian monastic groups. He has shared in the spiritual lives of Christian and Hindu communities and enjoyed the friendship, wisdom, and counsel of teachers from the Buddhist and Muslim traditions. A noted scholar of Jewish studies, Rabbi Dr. Goshen-Gottstein has taught at a variety of Israeli universities and held academic posts at Tel Aviv University, and served as director of the Center for the Study of Rabbinic Thought at Beit Morasha College, Jerusalem. He has edited a multi-volume series of interfaith studies and has published several monographs and many articles and books. Of his most recent publications, we can mention The Jewish Encounter with Hinduism, Wisdom, Spirituality, Identity, and Same God, Other God, Judaism, Hinduism, and the Problem of Idolatry, both published by Palgrave Macmillan. The subject of his talk today is Why Are Some Jews Drawn to Hinduism? A Personal Sharing. Following his talk, which should last approximately 30 minutes, Swamiji will join the rabbi for a joint Ask Swami and Rabbi session. So please join me in welcoming Rabbi Dr. Alon Goshen-Gottstein to our center today.
Shalom, namaste, and happy Diwali. I was quite surprised to discover that on such an auspicious day, you had no one better to invite than me, but then I discovered you don't really celebrate Diwali, so it's not such a big honor, I suppose. Sarvapriyananda ji and me, we go back a good way. Diane had mentioned that I have various relationships with Hindu leaders. So one of his teachers, role models, I don't know how to call it, is Swami Atmapriyananda, with whom he apprenticed, maybe that's a good way to put it, for many years, really one of the finest minds and spirits in Belramat. And he really is a soul brother to me. He's a member of the Elijah Board of World Religious Leaders that I direct. I don't think I need to update that bio line because I don't think the Elijah Board of World Religious Leaders was mentioned in what you said, Diane. So I really I've had the fortune of bringing together some of the words, what you call in your beautiful English, premier, and we would say premier, religious leaders worldwide of many streaks. If you go on our website and you look on the Elijah Board of World Religious Leaders, you'll see really a marvelous collection of religious leaders, several of whom are affiliated with the Ramakrishna mission. So that's allowed me to benefit from many friendships in the Ramakrishna world, multiple visits to Belur, and in that process I've had the blessing of getting to also befriend the Swamiji Sarvapriyananda who invited me today. So, as Diane mentioned, I have written a book on the subject titled The Jewish Encounter with Hinduism. And what I'm going to say today is not written in the book. In other words, it was specially prepared for you. People have been practicing a lot of tapas in this room, and the heat is becoming so strong that I think we can start asking for boons. And maybe the first boon we can ask for is how to turn off the heating. Does anyone else share this sentiment? There's nothing to be said. There's nothing to get, but it just requires one rabbi to make a request, and then and then a group of Hindus rush to have some fresh air. So yeah. So hopefully, yeah. Thank you. Why are some Jews drawn to Hinduism? So that led me to think of the question of the structure of Judaism, the structure of Hinduism, and the dynamics of movement. In general, let me say some introductory things. Judaism and Hinduism, you could say, are two fountainheads, east and west, so to speak, of the great major world faith traditions. From Judaism emerged Christianity and Islam. From Hinduism emerged Buddhism, Sikhism, Jainism, and then there are various permutations as they travel initially west and then later on, east and then eventually west, with, of course, the landmark date of 1893 and Swami Vivekananda's coming to the west, ushering an era of guru visits that continues down to this very day. As these two major traditions that have given birth to others, one raises then the question of what kind of relationships there are between them and what relations there are between other religions. And typically, several questions arise. Why would people who belong to this one tradition go to the other tradition? Both of them have ancient wisdom. Second question is, to what extent... I need the treble down. I keep hearing an echo on this, and whoever's managing that, if you can manage the treble a little bit down, thank you. I hope it's the last request I'm making. Yeah, Diwali, feel free to. You thought you were going to have a session of Ask the Rabbi. You didn't think you'd have Ask the Rabbi. Yeah. So, is the relationship reciprocal? In other words, to what extent is it a two-way street? Do Hindus show the same interest in Judaism as Jews show in Hinduism? One of the theses of my book is, in fact, it's not reciprocal, which leads us to look at the question. And then the question of what it is that they receive and what the structures of the religions are and what it is that they're drawn to in the different religions. So I'd like to introduce the Jewish part of it. No, one more brief mini introduction. We tend to think of questions as purely spiritual, but in fact, religion interacts with history, and it's constantly interacting with history. And therefore, to understand why certain movements occur within a religion, why a religion grows, expands, moves, people convert, what pressures there are, what stands they take, is always a function of the interaction of the particular history of the religion or the people who are the carriers of the religion with the ideals of the religion. In other words, religions don't interact in the abstract. They interact through people and they interact through histories with their complexities. So in fact, what one has to ask is, what is the history within Judaism that leads people, some individuals, towards certain configurations of Hinduism, and what configurations of Hinduism, and by vice versa, what does or does not occur on the Hindu side, and what particularities does that have? So this notion of the historical context leads me to the notion of crisis. And I'd like, as a starting point, to state that one of the theses also of my book, Judaism is in crisis. I think all world religions are in crisis. I think in many ways Hinduism is also in crisis. I'll get to that later on. But as a Jew, I can speak about the fact that Judaism is in crisis. And one thing about Judaism, the Jews are more aware of their crisis than others. In other words, why are we the chosen people? Because we're more aware of our crisis than anyone else. You can can put it that way. It's a new definition. So what does it mean that we're more aware of our crisis? For this, you have to understand the history. So the crisis of Judaism, there are multiple layers to it. Some go back to its foundation and the structure of what it means to live a life of spirituality as structured by life of following a detailed way of life and legislation, and the potential danger of losing God knowledge due to total immersion in practicalities of the spiritual, of the religious life while losing the spiritual life. So you can become an expert in the religious life but not have spirituality. That's one dimension. But more specifically, Judaism has been in crisis in some way for 2,000 years since our temple. When you go to India and you see we have a festival during which we commemorate the destruction of the temple, and we say today we're mourning the destruction of the temple, and the Hindu will look and you say, just build another temple. What's the big deal? Well, it doesn't work for us because poor us, we only have one God and we only have one temple. So we don't have the opportunity of just rebuilding at will. So all of history revolves around one sacred center, not multiple sacred centers. Eventually they get replaced by synagogues that function as small sacred centers, but one primary destroyed sacred center. So we're organizing our lives around a destroyed sacred center, a soul one, and along with it, we recognize the loss of certain spiritual qualities that used to be characteristic of former periods, specifically prophecy and a certain level of God knowledge that has been lost with it. And then wandering in exile, which has the dual benefits of deepening commitment and piety, deep growing and expansion of knowledge, but also the ongoing destruction of the life and a sense of crisis in the very historical life. So for 2,000 years we're carrying this crisis. But with Judaism's move into modernity, we enter a more specific aspect of crisis because in countries other than India, India was very hospitable to Jews and made them feel welcome. And therefore what I'm saying now does not apply to India. But in the West, under Christianity and Islam, Jews were always relegated to some secondary position. There were times of flourishing, but many points of persecution, segregation, ghettos. You all may be familiar with the term ghetto, but its origin has to do with Jews being segregated in their own areas in European towns by Christian authorities. The breakaway and the integration into broader life we call emancipation as a historical movement. With emancipation comes assimilation. With assimilation comes a loss of religious identity. With loss of religious identity is the loss of sense of God. And that loss of sense, now, of course, some people assumed other religious identities, but that itself becomes a crisis for Judaism. So as soon as you lose your sense of A, identity, and B, grounding in God, the religion is a crisis. And the core of Judaism's crisis is a crisis of God. In other words, large sections, not all sections thankfully, but large sections of the Jewish people have maintained their sense of identity, but they've lost their sense of God. They continue to talk of God, naturally, and God remains the theoretical structuring principle of the whole system. But if there isn't a living experience of God knowledge, there isn't a living experience of tasting, of experiencing, of mystical knowledge, then sociology takes over, communal life takes over, the quest for the unity of the Jewish people, the survival of the Jewish people. These are nowadays the primary agendas of the world Jewish community rather than finding God. So inside this particular historical crisis that's brought about by the particular circumstances of Jewish history comes the encounter with other religions. Now, how Judaism encounters other religions will be a function of the particularity of that religion. And the particularity of the Jewish encounter with Hinduism, I believe, is unlike that of other religions. When Jews convert to Christianity, for instance, they found Jesus. You could call Jesus a guru, but I don't think that's what it's about. So when Jews encounter Jesus, they either socially or spiritually or internally have some moment of opening, healing, recognition, transformation, rebirth, depending on the brand of Christianity. And they have encountered Jesus, and therefore they move on to Christianity. Jews come to Islam, very often it's pressure or at least a recognition of the unity, very often as a consequence of Sufi. Islam generally spread one central dimension of Islam's spread in the world was through Sufi and mysticism. So again, they have a Sufi experience. The history of Jews with Christianity and Islam is such that it's a very charged relationship. And therefore, one typically looks askance at Jews who convert to either of those two religions, because those two religions persecuted us. This goes along with the charge of idolatry, especially in relation to Christianity. You have the images of God, and you have the cross and statues in high churches, not in Protestantism. And those are labeled idolatry, and with idolatry comes a sense, don't come close to it. Hinduism enters already from the 30s, but specifically from the 70s, with a clean slate. There is no charge of anti-Semitism, no history of persecution, and there's just a spiritual teaching that's encountered not in its village form. When I travel through Nepal and I see Hinduism, it's unrecognizable to me because I've been exposed to a certain Hinduism of the ashrams and the great gurus and one thing and another, and I look at local Hinduism or local village Hinduism, it's unrecognizable to me. What you mean? I've had conversations with people. What, you haven't heard of the Upanishads? You don't know about Vedanta? Yeah. So you ask yourself, what % of Hindus know about this? That'd be an interesting question for us to discuss with Swami later on in the conversation. My hunch, I don't think more than 20% of Hindus know about the higher teachings of Vedanta and know about a sense of guru. Most of them is a family religion, tribal religion, and the elite or higher spiritual views, in my opinion, don't reach more than 20%. But it's those 20% that the Jews are attracted to. And they're attracted, and here I think is the particularity of the Jewish attraction to Hinduism. I think, and this is the recognition that I came to as I was preparing the notes for today's conversation, they're attracted particularly because they've encountered outstanding spiritual beings. It's not Hinduism as a thought system. It's not Hinduism as an answer to questions. Every religion has answers to questions. You know, Swami gives one answer, Rabbi gives another answer. Eventually everyone gives an answer, good, bad answer. It doesn't really matter. At the end of the day, all answers are bad answers because they're cognitive, and you've got to go beyond the power of words. What draws people is the encounter with some great presence. And here we have a fascinating phenomenon. On the whole, I think Hinduism has the highest output of outstanding spiritual exemplars. Now, this is something to discuss. How come? How can that be? Of course, I don't know the percentage. If you've got 1 billion Hindus, it could be that per capita the rate of great Mahatmas is not as high. But I think there's more to it. I think it's a culture that expects it. And when you expect something, it happens. Let me illustrate this to you with something that I realized during my visit in the Nordic countries when I was examining their form of Christianity. Catholics have miracles. Orthodox Christians have miracles. Christian saints, nowadays you can't become a saint if there's no miracle associated with you. So miracles, it's sort of part of the proof of sainthood and very often part of the job description. You go to Protestant countries, 0 miracles. So what's this about? Why don't, there's no one worthy of miracles in a Protestant country? There's just no expectation. If there's no expectation, it's not going to happen. Now, Hindus, they basically expect God to come down upon earth. The starting point is God, great fluidity in the boundary between God and humanity. So, moves one way, moves the other way. This is the fundamental difference between so-called Abrahamic faiths that have a much more rigid boundary, and certainly Hinduism has a very fluid boundary. So you expect people to be divine. Either they're divinized, or the divine comes down and they're proclaimed as avatars. And so whether or not they are avatars, but the expectation helps to produce great souls. Now, when I say helps to produce, I don't mean necessarily that people just through social pressure create it. I think authentically, spiritually, if up on the next plane they need to send someone there, What's the use of sending them to China, right? They'll become a communist official. So they have to send them to India, because there in India, people know that great souls, they know how to appreciate them. So for what it is and what it's worth, India has this enormous concentration of great souls, of understood internally as God manifesting, but objectively, you can't argue with the fact that they're great spiritual personalities. Many of them, some people feel that today we don't have any more great ones. I've still encountered in my travels in India. I just came back from India 2 weeks ago. I spent time with two wonderful great individuals. One was a Swami in Mysore, Ganapati Sachitananda. I don't know if people know him, but he's playing Carnegie Hall on December 2nd. And the other one I met, Madhusudan Sai, who also has wonderful power as a successor, or don't quite know how to say this, to Sai Baba. So, and I myself, in the summer at the Parliament of Religion that Swamiji couldn't attend because he had some health issues, I met Karuna Mai and some wonderful, great spiritual beings. Jews are attracted not to Hinduism. They're attracted to those great spiritual personalities. When you look at it, you see the history, beginning with Ramana Maharshi, continuing to all the major groups where gurus came to the West. Bhakti Vedanta, you got Jews at the leadership of ISKCON. Sai Baba, you got Jews at the leadership of Sai Baba movement. I think by the time Jews got onto Ramakrishna, you didn't really have a living presence. You really had much more of a legacy. So in St. Louis, I ran across a Jewish Swami. So I imagine there's more. If there's one Jewish Swami somewhere, there'll be another Jewish Swami elsewhere. And there's probably several Jews sitting in the room now. But in this sense, Ramakrishna is an example of what happens to a movement when that great spiritual personality is now 150 years gone by, and you're maintaining the legacy, but it's not the same impact as the immediate encounter. Amma, you go down to Amma, full of Jews, the people who counseled her how to structure her organization, Jewish people out in California that helped craft it, and shall we say, to channel her great divine spiritual gifts into an organization that allows her to do her wonderful philanthropic work. So Jews have been at the forefront of all the movements of the gurus, and I think it's because of Guru. So I realized that the particularity of the Jewish encounter, of the Jewish attraction to Hinduism, is that crisis. I'll tell you a story. So I was 2 weeks ago in near Bangalore. We were having Shabbat. Does Shabbat need anyone do not know what Shabbat is? Wonderful. So you're all great realized souls. So we were having Shabbat, and I hosted the person who was hosting us. I was hosting him. Well, my wife and I were hosting him for Shabbat meal. A Jewish person had been with Sai Baba and now has moved on to playing a major role in Madhusudan Sai's organization. Loved Shabbat. Really was carried away by it. And we got into talking about his experience. So the way he tells it, I didn't want to go deeper into it, but his description was the rabbi ran a brothel and the cantor was molesting teenagers. So I don't know exactly what the factuality of it is, but but whatever it is, they don't seem to have been great. This so much is a citation of what my friend David told me. What happened there, I don't know, but obviously it sounds one step less than a great spiritual soul. And so the role models, who are the role models? Now, I think one of the characteristics of the Jewish draw to Hinduism is what kind of Jews. And I would say that 90% or more, I don't want to say 100% because I've known some exceptions, but 90% or more of the people who are drawn are people who come from non-Orthodox movements. In other words, where a certain power of spiritual vitality, including God quest, has been lost in favor of communal affairs, weakened practice, and they seek spiritual intensity, and they turn to Hinduism. Someone made a very interesting observation. The other religion the Jews like to turn to is Buddhism. But Buddhism has spiritual teachers, but doesn't have typically the same, great figures like Thich Nhat Hanh that also Jews have been drawn to, even Dalai Lama. But Buddhism one goes to for the teachings. Buddhism goes to for peace of mind. One doesn't turn to in a quest for God. So you want God, you go to Hinduism. You want peace of mind, you go to Buddhism. And therefore, Americans have been turning in the quest for God to Hinduism as known through the gurus. Now, what happens when they get a touch of that divine? One of two things can happen. One is that this becomes their life calling, because that's where they encountered God. So, keeps a hold on them. The other is that they return to Judaism. In other words, they've tasted something, and then there's a movement of Baalei Tshuva, people who return to Judaism as a consequence of their encounter with Hindu gurus. Where do they return? They never return to where they came from. They return to Orthodox Judaism, because it's in Orthodox Judaism where they have the capacity to encounter that, and specifically to Hasidic Judaism. So one of the main places to come back to is where there is the equivalent of a great spiritual teacher. So probably the greatest among in the last generation was Rabbi Menachem Mendel of Lubavitch. I'm sure everyone here, as part of their being God-realized, have heard of the Lubavitcher Rebbe. So the Lubavitcher Rebbe has been a magnet for many of the people coming back into Judaism. But there have been other figures as well who've been drawing them. Rabbi Shlomo Carlebach, Rabbi Zalman Schachter, and others of different kind of spiritual orientation. But it's within, typically, Zalman Schachter, it wasn't really Orthodox. He was initially, but eventually he founded another stream within Judaism. But the point is, typically when they return to something more similar to what they experienced. So some Jews have the trajectory of discovering something of God through Hindu gurus and then looking for something equivalent. Others stay. Now, you have to understand that there's this. I said earlier about religion having a dimension that's spiritual but also historical. There's also a sociological dimension, gender. As far as I can tell, men and women are seated here together, if my analysis is correct. You go to an Orthodox, a Hasidic community, not only are men and women not seating together, but many women, in many cases, are barred from direct contact. So I spent Shabbat just now with a Hasidic rabbi in Brooklyn, very dynamic, but he doesn't receive women. So women play second fiddle, second role there, second sitar. So it's very hard to make a move if you're looking for something spiritual and then to find it in another religion when you don't really get full access. The beauty of Lubavitcher Rebbe, by the way, was his total elevation of women and making all the teachings available to them, even while maintaining a certain level of gender segregation. Very often I see this. I was just in the Swami Narayan temple in the new one in New Jersey. A marvel architecture. I was there on Friday. Okay, so there's segregation. They sit separately, but there isn't a sense of exclusion of women or they're necessarily being second rate. That's how it was in Lubavitch. In other words, you maintain the gender segregation, but there wasn't a sense that women are excluded. In many Hasidic communities, they're not officially excluded, but de facto they're excluded from much of the knowledge. So there's the gender issue, there's the sociology issue, there are things that make it very hard to find those teachings within Judaism. In other words, Judaism certainly had its gurus, and Judaism still has some gurus. We call it tzaddik. Tzaddik is a saintly master. But remember, when Jews encounter Hinduism, on the whole, they encounter an export of Hinduism. They don't encounter Hinduism necessarily as practiced. There are differences. This particular center here has made a point of accommodating itself to the Western mentality and to a certain degree downplaying some of the ritual element in favor of the teaching that makes it more universal. Others, say Hare Krishna, ISKCON, made the alternative choice. We're going to import the whole thing lock, stock, and barrel. You take it or leave it, and many people take it because there's a sense of authenticity to that completeness. So it's easier to become attached to an export form of Hinduism centered around a great personality that doesn't complicate you in some of the ways that things are complicated in the home religion, and that becomes a reason for people moving away. And then either being able to come back or not being able to come back. So this is crisis, this is sociology, this is the draw, and this is the particular profile of Hinduism as a religion that can draw people based on its guru structure, which I believe is particular to it. What does that mean then for me, as an Orthodox rabbi who's pretty fulfilled in his religion? So why do I have so many Hindu friends? Why am I so drawn personally to exploring Hinduism? Every year I go to India, every year I explore another element of it, and it doesn't stop fascinating me. And I have no interest in going to visit China and Hong Kong and one thing and another. So it's not that I go equally distributed in the world. I'll explore India ad infinitum, and I won't explore other places. So why is that? So Swami Sarvapriyananda claims that I have Hindu samskaras from previous lifetime. This was not a joke. But so he says. Who am I to argue? Swami Sarvapriyananda also talks about, and I believe this comes from Thakur, but please correct me, Swamiji, the sense of spiritual gluttony. Because when he describes Ramakrishna's successive experience of God in different religions, it's not because you don't have God. There's a sense of wanting to taste God in his different expressions. And I share this with Sarvapriyananda very much, who as Swami has been, I'll get to this question of reciprocity in just a moment, has been one of the most open and engaged in really reciprocal exploration of other religions. Typically, Hindu masters are happy. They have the truth, they have it, but yes, they'll talk to other people, but they're not really interested in exploring the depth of another religion, and Sarvapriyananda definitely is an exception to that. So the sense of gluttony. I want to taste God in his fullness, in all his expressions. So that's another, it could be that I'm just a glutton. You put me at a table with chocolates, you'll see what I mean, and you put me at a table with spiritual chocolates, you'll see similarly how it works. So I mean, I'm just, I lack spiritual self-control. The other potential explanation is that Hinduism has something in particular to offer that I and Judaism are lacking. So I spoke earlier about crisis, and one dimension of the crisis is the crisis of what we call the exile of the Shekhinah. The Shekhinah, for convenience and maybe even accuracy's sake, would be the equivalent of Shakti. So the divine mother power that enlivens and gives birth to everything. And that is the focus of the quest of the mystics and the Kabbalists. And all the teaching is there, but we don't always have the energy to go along with it. So very often our teachings remain like a roadmap without people being able to experience and to live it fully. So one thing you do have when things go well is really the power of Shakti within Hinduism. The fact is, you look here, so you have Sarada Devi and Ramakrishna side by side. In fact, I mentioned the Swami Narayan temple. My observation is that it's really the Swami Narayan Hinduism is the only kind of Hinduism where you have two male figures on the altar and not a male and a figure, right? And this is not a joke. This is an observation. In other words, even in their temple, right, you have Sita Ram and Radha Krishna and Shiva Parvati, and Swami Narayan and his chief disciple, who's male. You don't have the female figure. Very interesting and something to consider how that operates. But on the whole, the wealth of Hinduism is this incorporation of this mother aspect. And this is something that we in Judaism are desperately in need of. So it could be that the quest to Hinduism is part of a retrieval. So yes, crisis, yes, God quest, but that God quest doesn't have to necessarily come from a place of not having God. Sometimes precisely from a place of yes, having God, there's a sense of deeper discovery of God in God's wealth, the multiple colors, the multiple tastes, and also the particularity of that particular angle of certain energies that might be available in another religion and not available to Judaism. So I account for that as one possible alternative to the samskara theory. So the last thing I want to talk about is this question of reciprocity. I said at the beginning of my remarks that here we have two great traditions. So why is it that one is moving to the other? Why is one showing greater interest than the other? And this has been throughout. Now, when I started visiting India 20 years ago, people didn't know Judaism. And you look at history, and this chapter devoted to this in my book, you see that even Vivekananda and going right through up to the maybe 90s of last century, Judaism is like a branch or an aspect of Christianity because no real meaningful impact by the Jewish community. And they know Judaism as the Old Testament of the New Testament, or that part of the Bible, and therefore Judaism is seen by them as Christianity, and Christianity comes with the entire charge of missionary and colonialism, and therefore Judaism gets collapsed into the whole positioning of Christianity. That's changed. Nowadays, people in India have a sense of Israel, and because they have a sense of Israel, they have a sense of Judaism, much stronger. I see together with cell phones and better highways comes a better recognition of Judaism. Which then raises the question, so what does Judaism have to give to Hindus? And that, again, would have to be answered through the question of the structure of the religion. I don't think the Jewish gurus of today have what to give Hindus. The Lubavitcher Rebbe made a point of universalizing a campaign for the 7 Noahide commandments as a ground spiritual principle of morality for all religions, but I am personally not convinced that this is an adequate message that Judaism has to give to the world. So on the guru front, I think the movement really is towards Hinduism, whether you stay there, whether you come back. But as I said earlier, I don't think all of Hinduism is guru-centered. It would like to be, you would like to think that it's Hindu-centered, but in fact, the different gurus are vying, even if not in a competitive way. There are multiple answers to the same problem of how to provide spiritual meaning to the life of Hinduism, which otherwise is controlled by Brahmanical rituals and temple culture or slack observance in one thing and another. And we'll get back to this question of the percentage probably in a minute. I think it's, just imagine it's like a conch that's ringing in the temple. So that doesn't mean that Judaism doesn't have what to give Hinduism. I think the point has to be identifying the crisis. In the same way that identifying the crisis of Judaism was key to understanding what it is that leads Jews to Hinduism, one has to identify what is the crisis of Hinduism, which of course is a matter that Hindus have reflected less upon than Jews have, but I think there's increasing reflection on it. So of course there is the loss of spirituality, which is universal. I was shocked my first visit to India, how materialistic India is. Hey, it's like the rest of the world. I was expecting something different. But then there's the problems of diaspora, the maintaining of identity, the integration of spiritual life and family life, the integration of spiritual life and workaday life, the power of rest, the power of how to live a full spiritual life in the West, in the world, outside ashram, okay? And most Hindus, you may be surprised to know, live outside ashrams. And here, I think the testimony of Judaism has a lot to offer, because Judaism has now thousands of years of a wisdom of organizing a religious community, maintaining spiritual and religious practices, so that even within its crisis, it's still able to maintain a religiosity. We don't know what's going to happen to third and fourth and fifth generation Hindus as they come here. And I know all of you are worried about it, and even the Akshardham that I visited a few days ago itself is an attempt to address that by creating a kind of spiritual, visible center that draws appreciation and upholds identity. It's an ongoing challenge. Well, we've been at it longer than anyone else. So there are different answers and different ways that religions can help one another. My view of interreligious relations is that religions are there to help one another. In other words, the typical Jewish view is that you're stealing my people and you're taking them over. But that's inevitable given the crisis. If you see the bigger situation of crisis, then I think we have to reframe the question. Then the question becomes, how can religions help one another rather than compete with one another? Helping one another is also helping one another to be better. So some gurus, on paper, during Hindu-Jewish summits, there were several of those leading to declarations. You can read about it in my book. Some Hindu gurus claim, no, we don't want Jewish converts. You should just be better Jews. And there are many stories of Hindu gurus and Dalai Lama and others sending Jews back to their religion. But it's not foolproof because at the same time, they're also bringing people into their religion. But in theory, there is a stance that has been taken. Come to me, get what you can from me, go back to your source. And that creates a model for spiritual collaboration and mutual support between the religions, which I see as the important one. And here, there's no doubt that what some Jews find can be helpful to all. And by way of invitation, I also think that Judaism has what to offer to strengthen some of the struggles of Hinduism. And therefore, at the end of the day, it's light meeting light. And with light meeting light, I conclude this Diwali presentation. Thank you.
Hello, good morning. My name is Jill Mianovich, and I was born in a Christian Orthodox family, and I was drawn to Hinduism and Buddhism. And most of the Swamis in the Shivananda ashrams are Jewish. And a lot of them became Swamis because of the violence. And when they left the Israeli army, a lot of them mentioned that when they graduated from high school, they had to go into the army, and a lot of them were in special forces. And I think it's a 2-year period, something like that. They were trained, and encountered so much violence. And at the end of that, they received whatever stipend they had, and they traveled. They had to go to, see the world. And a lot of them were drawn to India because it was great and cheap. And when they encountered yoga, hatha yoga, most of them decided to take the teacher's training course, which is a 28-day boot camp. And when you take the boot camp, which I've taken, something shifts in you. You know, you no longer want to eat the meat, and you no longer want to do the same things that you were doing on autopilot as we're programmed in the West, a lot of it through television and sitcoms and everything else. Everything shifts in your life.
You'll have to sharpen the question.
Yeah, so the question is, why is there violence? Because a lot of people came from Judaism and they became either Christian or Muslims afterwards. Why are they turning against their own kin when we all believe in the same source, in goodness? And why are we choosing to have the, military industrial complex drive us to constant wars? It's over and over and over again when there is such a better way to live. All the saints have said it, live simply, serve, live, serve, purify, love. Why?
Meditate.
Thank you.
Thank you for that question. Thank you for bringing in the name of Shivananda, who I consider in some ways my own spiritual father. So, for the sake of those people who don't really know, the question that was asked references one particular strand of Shivananda disciples who are based in the Bahamas, where they have an ashram run by an Israeli, a good friend of mine, Swami Sarvapriyananda. We go back, Sarvapriyananda and myself, we go back well over 40 years before he headed he was heading in the movement there. We've spent nights together living in the same room. We both received from the same spiritual teacher who was outside his order, and she was my direct guru, if you will. So I'm more than familiar with that particular group. So let's first of all contextualize. This is not universal Shivananda. It's one particular branch of Shivananda that was founded in the Bahamas by a Swami who, due to my now getting close to 70, whose name I no longer remember, but you can Google it. Vishnu Devananda, exactly. Thank God you're not getting close to 70. The story is actually more complex. There is definitely a universal trend of Israelis traveling to India post-army. There's definitely a sense of needing to let go. The quest to India is complicated because it's cheap, it's English speaking, it's easy to do drugs, and there's a spiritual component. So it's very complex. This was not a joke. So it's very complex how these elements come together. The particular group of the Bahamas are not necessarily the outcome of Israeli post-army. They were practicing in Tel Aviv, where Vishnu Devananda founded a center. They had a strong spiritual life, and contrary to the way you described it, they never left Judaism. So they dance a very complicated dance. In their center in Tel Aviv, they celebrate Shabbat. They pray. They do Jewish things. They follow Jewish rituals, and they try to reconcile their Judaism in a Vedanta way. Whether their way of reconciling things is successful or not, buy a copy of my book at a reduced rate somewhere or another, and see the discussion of whether their synthesis is successful or not. I discussed that. There's two sides to it. Otherwise, there wouldn't be a discussion. So, all of which is to say that the narrative you provided is partial, bordering on imprecise. The key question, of course, that you asked is to what extent is there also a component of the stress of the violence and the ongoing violence and living in an insecure country that leads people to India into a spiritual quest. And here there's an interesting observation, because there are two waves of Jews being drawn to India. One is the American wave and one is the Israeli wave. And these are two distinct waves. The Israeli wave really opens up only after diplomatic relations are facilitated in the 80s or 90s, whenever it was that we established Indian, Google it, diplomatic relations with India. So everything I said was 100% true about the American wave. The Israeli wave has this added dimension, as you correctly pointed out, of people needing to get away. A friend and colleague of mine, Laurie Patton, has written on this. There is a need of Israelis to get away from the sense of violence and to seek peace. But of course, this goes back to what are they seeking when they go to India, and really only a small part of them are seeking God. The short answer to the long question is that your narrative I don't necessarily buy into, but thank you for bringing in one important dimension of the bigger picture.
We have a question from Christine Aquino. All things, physical and mental, including body and mind, are objects and therefore can be experienced. The real self or spirit or God or witness consciousness is the experiencer or the knower. If the experience is poverty, how can God experience it when he or she is the source of all things? How can God experience hatred when he or she is all love? How can God experience death when he or she is life? How can God experience sadness when God is all joy? Please explain.
Okay, I'll take that. It comes from a Vedantic perspective, but I'll request the rabbi to chip in afterwards. And basically, this is a question of evil in any philosophy, especially in any religion, theistic religion especially. You have to explain why there is suffering when God exists. An all good and all powerful God, why would there be suffering? So I'll give two answers. One straightforward from a dualistic Vedanta perspective, where the answer is pretty straightforward. God doesn't experience poverty, God doesn't experience unhappiness, God doesn't experience sadness. It is we who experience poverty, unhappiness, and sadness. Dualistic, Who, after all, if you look around, who is sad? Who is suffering from poverty and deprivation? Who is experiencing misery? It's human beings. So, sentient beings experience suffering. God does not. So that resolves the problem from a dualistic perspective. But why do sentient beings experience suffering? Multiple answers can be there. From an Indian perspective, the most pervasive answer, most common answer would be karma, causality. We experience suffering because of our past karma. We know this particular theory that in past lives, we have accumulated negative karma, and that results in unpleasantness in this present life. We have accumulated good karma, and that results in pleasantness. And if you complain that there's too little pleasantness and too much unpleasantness in my life, what does that say about you or your past lives? So that's one answer. That's just one. That's the surface level answer. But this question was not put from that perspective. This question was put from a Advaitic perspective, where it seems paradoxical. After all, from an Advaitic perspective, sentient beings and God are not separate. There is only one reality, that is Brahman, existence, consciousness, bliss. And so how could that Brahman, which is presumably limitless and perfect, how could that Brahman experience poverty and sadness and misery and hatred and all of that? Remember, little technicality here, that Brahman, which is one, non-dual, appears as this world of appearances through the mediation of Maya. Maya is that which projects the one as the many. Since it projects the one as the many, it projects in different ways. With Maya, that same Brahman is called God. And yes, that God, which is similar to the God of dualistic religions, in Vedantic terms, Saguna Brahman, Brahman with attributes, is all-powerful, all-loving, all-good, beyond poverty. That God does not experience poverty or suffering or sadness. But that Maya also projects that same limitless consciousness as so many sentient beings. And those sentient beings, they undergo spiritual evolution until they realize their oneness with the divinity, with the ultimate reality. And as we undergo spiritual evolution, we go through various experiences. A more subtle, little more difficult, but more sort of final kind of answer is this. The difference between the divinity and our present state of experiences is not a real difference. It's a difference between knowledge and ignorance. So in ignorance, we are these sentient beings struggling in a world of strife and suffering. When we realize what we truly are and what this world truly is and what God truly is, we realize one non-dual Brahman. When we realize that, these questions, I won't say they are solved, but they're dissolved. Notice, these questions which we are asking, for those who we consider to be enlightened, they don't have these questions. These questions are on our side. They have presumably found the answers, and they don't seem to be bothered by these questions anymore. So there's a difference between knowledge and ignorance. In ignorance, we seem to be in this world of strife and struggle. When we become enlightened, we realize that we are one with Brahman, and this is a world of appearance. Maybe at best a school for spiritual evolution. That would be an Advaitic answer. But it's a deep question. In theology, in different world religions, this is called the problem of evil. With an all-powerful and all-loving and all-good God, why should there be so much suffering in the world? That's the essential form of that question. I'm sure the Rabbi has given a lot of thought to this in his studies and his research.
Not sure it's me who's given a lot of thought. I think world religions, as you just said, have given a lot of thought. So I'm going to start with Christianity, and then I'm going to move to Judaism. And really the question is, at the end of the day, is, like you said, is evil real, or what is the scope of experiencing? In theory, from the Advaita perspective, if God is everything, then God is also the poverty and the pain and the death and everything. Then everything would be included in that everythingness of God. So really the foundation of the question is a dualistic foundation, because the question was posed, if God is good, how can he experience bad? But if God is everything, then he can experience both good and bad without any distinction. So really that was a dualistic question attempting to frame a monistic view of God, maybe not fully successfully. How do other religions deal with this? So, did Jesus suffer on the cross? I don't know if we should do a poll in the room or not, but did Jesus suffer on the cross? If he was God, how could he suffer on the cross? If he didn't suffer on the cross, then what's the point? So this question was a question that Christian theology struggled with in the early centuries. There was a position called docetic. Docetic means it only gave an appearance that he was suffering. It looked as though he was suffering, which fits in with what you said, Swamiji, about the appearance from our perspective. But then there was a counterpoint that said, no, for this to really be, Jesus had to really suffer. In other words, if you talk in terms of God coming down here and experiencing humanity, God has to experience humanity to the full. So Christianity has to come up with various answers of how the divine in its fullness can make room for this limitation. And one important notion that appears already in the New Testament from Paul is the notion of kenosis. an emptying out. God empties himself out from that fullness in order to take on that limitation, which of course, if you couple that with an Advaita Vedanta perspective, is really not an issue, because that emptying out itself is part of the divine. And a Jewish answer that would be very similar appeals to the notion of tzimtzum. Tzimtzum means divine self-contraction. So God empties himself from the fullness in order to create reality. So the Kabbalistic theory of creation, as propounded by the great Kabbalistic sage, the Ari, a 16th century great Kabbalist from Tzfat, sees the first step in creation as God creating an empty space within which creation happens. And within that, you get the kind of dualism where there's God and there's creation, because prior to that, there was only divinity. But in order for creation to be real, in other words, what Swamiji spoke about, the shift from nirguna to the saguna, from the non-dual to the dual, there's something that isn't appealed to by the force of Maya, but actually by a force of a real happening. So in the same way that kenosis is understood as a real happening in the divine, so tzimtzum is a real happening in reality, where there's room that's made for creation, and within that come the origin of all limitations, evil, etc., suffering, etc. This then plays out, still on Jewish Kabbalistic ground, in the fact that we have different faces of God. So while the absolute God will not suffer, but within the divine figure, is the aspect of the Shekhinah that I referred to earlier, suffers with us. It is the suffering face of God, if you will. It's the creative aspect, but it's also the aspect that comes together with us and joins in our reality and therefore suffers with us. So we can simultaneously speak, in a matter that's analogous to what Swami said, of God being beyond all suffering, beyond all limitation, and at the same time God also undertaking and entering and being with that, and that is what is known as the exile of the Shekhinah and the suffering of the Shekhinah. So the answer is that great religions, as Swamiji says, struggle with that, and they provide, I would say, parallel responses.
I'm Srini Gurappu. I came from Texas for this session. I'm the for this session, yes.
Just for this session?
Yes, for this session.
I'm going to Texas at the end of the week.
Yeah. In fact, you should come. I have a nonprofit called Youth Excellence Center, where we do it. And in fact, now I'm going to build on something that you just mentioned, where in the broader world of Hinduism, only 20% are actually engaged in this spiritual quest. Most everybody is either ignorant or just caught up in the mechanics of life. And this problem gets even more acute as we're talking about the third generation, fourth generation. I'm already seeing with the second generation. So never before in the history of humanity, today we are faced with so many battlefields at once. Before it was all mostly about religion or power and this stuff. But here, now we are faced with things like climate change, the technologies, modern technologies like AI and CRISPR, where you're almost creating a parallel universe. And then economic divide. So most youth don't have a positive perspective on the life and the world. And previously, when we were engaged in similar situation, the God provided that safe space, or the faith provided the safe space. But today, most equate faith means conflict. Religion means conflict. And sometimes, when you interpret in some of the scriptures like Gita, where when you are faced with this many battlefields, your right call to action is to go fight to restore excellence. So most youth are now being drawn to action from a position of either survival or to restore excellence. So in that, the faith is actually not taking the prominent role. So in this kind of situation, what should we prioritize in the youth on, either to restore economic excellence or restore climate excellence, or, humanity versus technology, to this God quest, which seems to be not an agreeable or inclusive kind of a path. And then Swamiji, one of the things is, when we try to interpret, Gita, the Gita actually created the broader Kurukshetra, but at the end of the day, there were no good saviors, right? There was nothing actually left behind for people to actually go enjoy, or at least that's one of the interpretation. So people are like, even if you are calling it out, what is the ultimate outcome? Ultimate outcome, is it only like a collateral damage? There is all destruction, but there is nothing actually left behind. So how do we inspire the youth take a more positive in this world of many battlefields, and how can faith play a bigger role? Thank you very much.
Rabbi, would you take it up first?
You really came just for this session?
Swamiji.
It happens all the time.
Yeah.
Huh?
It happens all the time. People come from all the places just to listen to Maharaj.
Maharaj, I understand, but me?
Yeah.
If I can reframe your question, it is the tension between activism and spiritual experience. And what do we educate to? And what is the balance between them? And can one exist without the other? By the very framing of this question is implied the answer that they need each other. So here's an interesting observation. The job description of a guru has changed radically over the last 50 years. Gurus used to be non-political, non-activist. They did some charitable work, but they were basically sitting around teaching people how to reach enlightenment, assuming that was the adequate answer. Today, no guru, major guru, is worth his salt if he hasn't built a big hospital, an educational chain, become involved in major issues. The whole profile of guruhood seems to have undergone a major change in the direction of activism. And it's an interesting question that I haven't seen anyone give accounting to why that is. Also interesting to think of the Ramakrishna mission over a course of more than 100 years and how it's evolved in this particular direction based on the foundations that were totally not activist, and how the branches of Ramakrishna have balanced that over time. So there is an obvious answer within the Hindu tradition that you're coming from, which is karma yoga. In other words, we perform karma yoga, and therefore it is a yoga, but it's a yoga that's action-oriented, and that action is for the welfare of others. That's the easy answer. You pose the question from the educational angle. And the educational angle is, how do we offer the youth, as you put it, a balanced perspective between having a spiritual life and motivating their idealism, so it is not just human activism, but it is tempered by the spirituality. And if I go to the Jewish model, and I'm happy to cite the Lubavitch movement again, it's a remarkable example of balancing the two. Because under very theosophical foundation and unitive and mystical foundations, the Lubavitch Rebbe has created a worldwide movement. Today, there's a convening in New York of, I think, 2,200 worldwide emissaries, each one representing another spot on the globe. The joke goes, if you have Coca-Cola there, you have Lubavitch there. In other words, they've created a global network of spiritual presence that's helping people actively under any condition, but founded on these mystical foundations. So that's mysticism in action. So that's, I am sure that had they not had those foundations, because what do those foundations tell them? That God is everywhere. Because God is everywhere, can serve God everywhere. And our goal is to recognize God's kingdom in this world, and therefore we serve in this world. So this is a kind of karma yoga practice grounded in spirituality and idealism. To me, that is an ideal model of balancing the two out. You have only that, then you get into some forms of what some Jewish groups look like, where they're too self-involved, and therefore they're not adequately aware of the outside. Otherwise, you get involved in what is nowadays a common profile of the Jewish left, quote unquote, which is pure idealism that may at times carry the name of God, but isn't informed by spiritual experience. So how do you maintain that balance? A, by knowing that you need it, and B, that's what today's gurus do. I think today's gurus give a different teaching than the gurus that inform this particular order here. I think today's gurus give much more of an attempt to offer a balanced view of that. That's part of the change in profiles, also the change in education. So how do you go past that 20%? Only through expansion in education and doing more work. I don't have any more great wisdom to offer this, which is precisely the moment to pass the mic on to Swamiji.
Just one response to what the rabbi said. Actually, it's a correction. He was saying that our organization, the Ramakrishna movement, was non-activist to begin with, but has become involved in social issues over the last 100.
Ramakrishna himself.
By Ramakrishna himself, that is right. But there were elements in his teaching which were actualized by Vivekananda from the very beginning. So, and that answers a larger question which the rabbi raised, that over the last 100 years, haven't you seen Hindu gurus becoming more socially involved, more socially active? As he said, there isn't a guru worth the name who doesn't have a school established or a hospital or something like that. And the answer to that is yes, there is a big change in the last 100 years. And the answer to that is yes, it's because of Vivekananda. Vivekananda was the pioneer. When he did that, it was revolutionary. People didn't accept it at all. You are monks, you're supposed to wander around begging for your food and giving discourses on philosophy and meditation. That's what you're supposed to do, not run schools and colleges and hospitals. But that changed. Within 100 years, it's become normal. It's very normal for somebody to go to an ashram in India and ask about the spiritual teachings, yes, but also ask, what are you doing for the local community? And you would expect a positive answer. That was not there earlier. This is quite strictly separated. Taking care of the community, yes, but that was the job of the householder, of the king, of society. And the monks were very precisely sort of designated for spiritual teaching, spiritual practice. How did Vivekananda accomplish this? He accomplished this by showing spirituality and social activism, social service, betterment of the society are not two different things. This is a deep insight. This was a further development of Advaita or non-duality. Vivekananda gave us the motto of the whole order. Our whole order has the motto, Atmano Mokshartham Jagat Hitaya Cha, for your own liberation and for the welfare of the society, welfare of the world. For your own liberation and for the welfare of the world. So why are we monks? Why are you all spiritual practitioners? For your own sake, yes, for your own enlightenment and liberation, but also as a blessing to the whole world. So both. And we have often debated the nature of that and. For your own enlightenment, for the welfare of the world, but that and in between, what does it mean? And the conclusion that we have come to, because the debate is entirely possible. There can be people who are only interested in meditation, philosophy, enlightenment, devotion, basically 100% spiritual seekers. Not so much interested. And we are well-wishers for the world, but you take care of yourself. And there can be people who are deeply interested in social activism, and for the doing good to the world, and not all that interested in spirituality. And when you combine the two, you need to ask, what does this and mean? I remember this professor of mine, before I became a monk, I was interested in the Ramakrishna order. So I asked the professor, what do you think of the Ramakrishna mission? And this professor, he said, oh, they do good work, but they all have all that monk, God, meditation thing, all unnecessary things they've got. See, that's from that other angle of betterment of the society. Why bring in stuff like meditation and devotion and enlightenment? All that's unnecessary. Just run schools and run hospitals. That's great. I saw that in another form at the Harvard Divinity School. So I was there just a few years ago, and young people, very idealistic. Remember, it's a school for study of religion. And almost all the young, bright students there, they were interested in gender issues, in immigration issues, in global warming, in this and a lot of issues which are all good. None directly involved with spirituality as such, as you might think. They thought just the other way around. They thought that is spirituality. They gone to the extreme of saying that, not that we are not interested in spirituality, we are interested in betterment of the world. No, they are thinking this betterment of the world which we are doing is spirituality. Without this, what is the meaning of spirituality? They go to the other extreme of making a very serious mistake. I pointed it out, not to I think the annoyance of the professor. We were studying 6 Christian contemplatives from ancient times till modern times. And I pointed out, notice one thing, when you study Evagrius, who lived about 100 or 200 years after Christ, you study St. John of the Cross, you study St. Teresa of Avila. These are the 3 ancient or medieval Christian mystics. And then you study someone like, I think Howard Thurman, who was a mentor to Martin Luther King. You study this Thomas Merton, and that Waiting for God. She was Jewish, very closely, associated with Catholicism in the Second World War. She starved to death. Her brother was a very famous mathematician. There's the book, Waiting for God. Simone Weil. Yeah, Simone Weil. Simone Weil. So you study them. Now notice, Simone Weil was very interested in the war and how to, the sufferings of the people in the Second World War. Howard Thurman was very powerfully taken up by race issues in this country. And Thomas Merton, on and off, he was interested in the anti-war activism during the Vietnam War. I pointed out to the annoyance and disconcernment of the professor and the students, none of whom understood, I think, and none of whom liked it. I pointed out, notice, this deep concern with social welfare. It's different issues of society. It's entirely lacking in the ancient mystics. The slavery was widespread throughout the Mediterranean world in those days. Neither Evagrius nor St. John of the Cross had anything to say about it. And the African slave trade was beginning by the time St. Teresa was writing. She doesn't even take notice of it. Not that they were bad people, they were genuinely spiritual people. It's just that they considered the secular and the spiritual to be two different realms. And you be in the secular world, you be a very good person, but to try to reform the secular world in your own idea of an ideal world, a spiritual world, that they did not think it their duty. The ancient Christians, what did they say about slavery? They advised the Christian slave to be a good slave and the Christian slave owner to be a good master. At no point anybody ever raised the question that slavery is bad. So that consciousness was not there. And it's just dishonest to say that this is how Christianity has been interpreted through the ages. So they were a little shaken up when I said all this. And so is it wrong? Now comes the question. So what we are doing now, climate change, race issues, gender issues, are they not related to spirituality? They are. Especially in something like Advaita Vedanta. If there is only ultimately one reality, it must be this reality itself. And so that oneness, that has to be manifested in this life, in society, in our life, in our actions and thoughts. So what Vivekananda did was that enlightenment for yourself and the welfare of the world, that and in between does not mean two things, your own enlightenment and the welfare of the world. They are one thing. That which is your own enlightenment and that which is welfare of the world, they seem to be two different things. They are two different sides of the same coin. And that has now sort of become very pervasive in Hinduism, especially in the Hindu, as the rabbi said, the gurus and the ashram structure. As for the question about the Gita, the question was, when young people see the Gita after the war, there was nothing left, devastation all around, and so what do you take away from it? I never saw the Gita in that way, ever. You take away the message you're looking for. I am not interested in spirituality. So if you bring forth a book for me, I'll find out some fault there and let it go. And that's because I was never interested in the first place. So it never occurred to me. But it has occurred to people. I remember someone as eminent as Professor Amartya Sen. He was sitting in his class and he said, if you look at the first chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, his class on ethics, first chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, and in the first chapter, Arjuna puts forth many arguments against the war which is going to start. And Professor Sen said, at the end of the Mahabharata, if you see, what Arjuna said was right. Society was devastated, everybody died. So he was right, Krishna was wrong. I didn't say anything in the class, but no, I was just auditing. I was not. Is it auditing?
Yes.
Auditing, yeah. Just sitting in the class. So, but the point is, no, that's not true. There was a fight between good and evil. Good won. Society was re-established at least for a time being on a better footing, And we got this tremendous doctrine of karma yoga, of spiritualizing action. So all those things flow from us. Till today we are studying the Bhagavad Gita. Amartya Sen may not, but we are studying. No, I mean, people can draw all sorts of conclusions. Amartya Sen said once in the class that I wonder how Mahatma Gandhi drew his philosophy of non-violence from a book like the Bhagavad Gita. So, yeah, you can draw such conclusions. But it's sort of pre-decided what you're going to say. You've made up your mind already.
So two questions. First of all, this was Frank Looney, the class? Who was the professor? I'm curious.
Oh, this was Stephanie Paulsell.
I see.
She is teaching a course on Christian contemplative prayer.
So, at the end of the day, someone flew in from Texas just to find out how we do that, and both of us have an answer. And as both of us said, one should find a way of doing it, but both of us really haven't helped this poor fellow, and we've got to justify the airfare that he invested. So, how does one actually do it to hold these two dimensions together?
From an Advaitic perspective, that is the extension, I would say, or the further development of Advaita Vedanta, which Vivekananda proposes, that if it is one and non-dual reality, then that which we are experiencing right now, this world of deprivation and suffering and conflict and unhappiness, here we are called upon to action. So these are not two different things. Being good and being spiritual are not two different things. Being good is a manifestation of being spiritual. That way. You can do it that way. And you can approach it through both ends, I think. You can start with the idealism of doing something good in this world while educating oneself spiritually. And the other way could be, you start from the other end, meditation and philosophy and all of that, and try to do your best in this world. Both ways will work.
So, as I asked Swamiji, I had an answer for you. Came to my mind. And the answer is prayer. See, the problem with meditation, again, depends on what kind of meditation you do, but that meditation is in and of itself not immediately related to the action you're doing. It empowers you, it connects you, but then or you try to then maintain some sense of meditation maybe in the karma yoga, but they're not really inherently connected. Prayer is something where you connect the reality up to the divine. You lift it up. You draw forth the divine presence, compassion, will, attention, love to a situation. So an activism. The challenge isn't to hold the theory together. The theory is there. The problem is for us to realize the theory. So what is the mechanism for realizing that theory and creating a more unitive education, but also path of spiritual evolution? So I'd like to propose prayer as something key, because you don't only try to serve the people, but you pray for it. But not just praying, oh Lord, hear our prayer, but a deep quest for being in God's presence and raising the reality to God and bringing God's will into it. I think that is a very vital bridge that will connect activism to the meditative reality and could fill in the gap that, see, meditation takes you there, activism takes you here. Prayer is the bridge.
This question is from Karen Ashta. As a follow-up to your lecture on free will, Swamiji, I would like to ask if we are ordained by Prakriti, then why do we have desire to be a better person, get rid of our bad habits, etc.? If it is ordained by Prakriti, should we accept it as a will of Prakriti and accept our incapacity to change?
This is the same old question about free will, and I'm saying it's the same old question because we get it every now and then. But yes, it's a profound question. So the thing is, we seem to have free will, and a lot depends on that. Our whole society is organized on the basis of us having free will. And you go to a shop, you expect it to be freely choosing what you want to buy. That's why so much choice is presented before you.
That's why everyone wears blue jeans.
That's why everyone wears blue. Yes, but even advertisement, which sort of influences you to wear blue jeans, that also is predicated on influencing your free will. So then politics, you're supposed to freely choose your candidate. Then law, when the judge punishes somebody, the judge does so on the basis that this person of his or her free will did something wrong. If there was no free will, you can't really punish a person. So law, economics, politics, and lots of other things throughout our human society is predicated on having free will. And yet the problem is when you come to philosophy, you come to the philosophy of mind, you come to science, especially today neuroscience, all of it seems to point in the other direction. It seems to point in the direction of not having free will. I mean, a good deal of it. And I mentioned earlier the new book by Roger Sapolsky, Determined, the Science of Life Without Free Will. He brings forth overwhelming evidence, mostly from cognitive science, from neuroscience, to show that we really cannot have any free will in any serious sense. And that creates a contradiction. That means we have an illusion of free will, but we are not. We actually do not have free will. But that won't do, because when you have something like law, something as serious as law, sending people to prison, you must assume that there is actually free will, not just the illusion of free will. So what do you do? And one variation of that is this question, Prakriti. So that is the Sankhyan idea of conscious beings like us and material nature. Now it seems everything that we do here, everything that's done in this universe, and everything that we do is determined by the material nature, by Prakriti. In that case, we don't have free will. What is the point of trying to be better people and all of that? It's a complicated question, but for example, let me give you the answer from the Sankhyan perspective itself. What does Prakriti try to do for us? In Sankhya, there's Prakriti and Purusha, conscious beings and material nature. What does material nature try to do for us? It gives us experience and freedom. In Sanskrit, bhoga apavarga, experience of life. Lifetime after lifetime, we experience and evolve. And so the spiritual evolution is actually the purpose of Prakriti. Whether you feel you're doing it out of your free will or Prakriti is making you do it, practically doesn't make any difference. If you do it out of your free will, you will attain the goal of your life, which is spiritual freedom, fulfillment. If you think Prakriti is making you do it, then cooperate with Prakriti. Then you will attain spiritual freedom and fulfillment. It comes to the same thing. Sapolsky was asked, what you are saying is devastating for society. And he says, not really. It won't. Suppose I don't have free will, how will I live? That's just the same way. It won't make much of a difference. You will just go in the same way you've been going. Yeah.
My name is Hank Citron. I also studied at the Hebrew University, but a few years before you, I think. I have two things I'd like to get your opinion on. When I was following the singing that began, or the chanting that began in this meeting, I noticed that every word talked about I. In Judaism, the word is we. We see ourselves collectively as praying as an organization, and we, by definition, attempt to make a better world, spiritually and otherwise. From an Eastern position, yours seems to be more of a self-developing individual spirituality is the first issue of business, and secondly, as you point out, might be the coming of a social. That was one thing that I had in my mind, and while I'm talking about that, I forgot it, so if you can respond to this, I'll think of the second. Well, you'll motivate me.
It's all because you went to Hebrew University before me.
That might be it. That might be it. In the beginning of the Hebrew University, as a matter of fact.
God bless you. This is a very, very, very interesting observation. It's your first time here?
It's my second. My daughter is very active here and has brought me here earlier one time.
Good. Okay, so I just want to say one thing for understanding the sense of the I here locally, and then I'll address your key question, and that is that there are two I's. There's lower I and higher I. And I think what's fundamental to the people who inhabit this space is this quest for the higher I, the Atman, the divine self, as opposed to the lower ego self. So when someone comes from the outside and reads this, you might think of the I and the lower self. And it could be that some of the texts that you read go in that direction. But the ultimate focus of the I is because of the centrality of the notion of self and the unity of self with the divine in the Hindu thought. So getting these two I's together, that creates the great Jewish conundrum of I. Yeah.
Well aware of that.
Okay. Now to the substance of your question. I said earlier in my presentation that I think Judaism has what to give Hinduism. And I think you've just introduced a very important element, which is the sense of community. For whatever ways Hinduism is organized within itself, and I'm happy to get pushed back on this, but there isn't that same awareness of community and collectivity. And that, of course, stems from the fact of what is the starting unit of the religion. The religion of Judaism is the religion of the people of Israel. And there's a profound sense in which the individual is derived from the collective, and therefore the process is initially that of the collective, and then it extends to the individual. And this finds expression in a way that you didn't say, but I think you implied, in that our key prayers, the Amidah, the Shmoneh Esrei that's recited thrice daily, and all the major prayers are recited in the first person plural form, we rather than I. So there is a very strong sense that here's a community standing before it. Now that's Judaism's strength, that's Judaism's weakness, because at times that strength could eclipse the spiritual process of the individual, and it could also eclipse the view of the others because of over self-involvement with that community. And still, its strength is that collective sense. And the collective sense is not just we go out and serve the world, as you said. That's already a much more, shall we say, contemporary tikkun, which is a characteristic of non-Orthodox denominations. It's really that everything, our Torah learning and our quest for Messiah and our redemptive process. So it's all collectively oriented. So there is, I think, something very important in your observation. However, when you view the sequence of the prayer, the Jewish prayer, it goes through the Amidah. Are you familiar with the Amidah?
Sure.
Yeah. You go through the... Excuse me? Okay. So you go through the process of the Amidah, you finish on Varechta Yisrael B'Shalom, and then you start with a set of prayers that's formulated in first person singular. Guard my tongue from speaking evil, a request for humility, a request for opening the heart in Torah, a request for purification of the heart. So you move from collective to individual. So, in other words, the fullness of the spiritual process, even as illustrated in the liturgy, is a move from that collective, not just a collective of activism, but also we first stand before God as a community that has a history, a mission, a covenant, a purpose, a story, a wound, a suffering, a quest for exile, and a large part of our prayers is about that quest for redemption. So I said quest for exile, I meant quest for redemption. But then the individual expression of that is the quest for purification of the heart and the gaining of knowledge and repentance, all of which are expressed in the individual. So there is this balance, and different points in the history of Judaism, especially the Hasidic movement, places a much greater emphasis on the individual and the personal transformation. So you pitched the question from the perspective of the work of Tikkun, and might come back to you, which goes back to Brother Texas's tension between activism. No, this is not a pata. Between activism and spirituality. That itself finds expression between on the Jewish side, between the individual and the collective, and different emphases where you emphasize the activism, but the spiritual movement of Judaism is emphasizing the spiritual transformation. The more you emphasize spiritual transformation, the more you move towards the individual. And therefore, it's not a mistake or an accident that when you presented your question in terms of the first person plural, you didn't appeal to the prayer, which I picked up from your words to lift up as an important element, but you picked up on social activism. And that's precisely what's corrected when you speak of the spiritual process that even in Jewish text takes you much more back to the first person singular.
Can I just respond a little bit to what you said and what the rabbi said from a different angle? So there are actually broadly two kinds of religion. only one of which people here in the West or Middle East they are familiar with. There is an entirely different kind of religion which India from most ancient times has been familiar with. This is like this. One kind of religion is where you look out into the world and you seek for a power beyond this world, something that created this world, that runs this world, omnipotent, omniscient, and all of that. And that's the search for God. And when you say that, people in the West will say, yeah, that's religion. What else can it? But there can be an entirely different kind of religion. There is a religion which is the other way around. That the search is not for God, but for what am I or who am I? So these two directions in the search for in spirituality. One is called the that-oriented religion, and one is called the you-oriented religion. So from most ancient times in India, you had, of course, various kinds of religion which were Vedic in origin, which were primarily that-oriented. So devotional, searching, worshipping a divinity beyond nature, which creates the whole universe and so on and so forth. Or you had religions like Buddhism, Jainism, which were entirely self-inquiry based religions, inquiry into what we are. Now the thing is, when you are acquainted only with one kind of religion, so I can totally understand from a Christian or Jewish or Islamic perspective, when you come across something like Buddhism or yoga, Patanjali yoga, it seems like self-obsession. Where is religion here? Unless you have God, how can you have religion without God? It seems, people have asked me, a professor of religion asked me, doesn't this Advaita, it leads you to pride? I am God. That seems like the worst kind of pride or megalomania. So self-obsession, there are many ways Indian religions are characterized in the West. Navel-gazing religions, looking inwards only, not out into the world. No. There are genuine forms of spirituality which are based on the investigation of who or what we are. And both have their own advantages and disadvantages. The advantage of the God-seeking religion is God is omnipotent, omniscient, omnipresent, all-powerful. Nothing wrong with God. That one of the questions was there. God is, how can there be anything wrong with God? True, except one thing. If God exists. And that can always be doubted. That accounts for the billions of agnostics and a few 100,000 actual atheists also in this world today. The large spread of lack of belief, serious belief in the existence of God. God can always be doubted. And the other way around, the self-inquiry religions, one thing you can never doubt, as Descartes discovered closer to our time, is your own existence. That you can never doubt. Nobody seriously has ever doubted that I exist. So self-inquiry based religions have certain advantages, and there are distinct approaches. If you go to God-centered religions, it will be a church-centered or synagogue-centered or temple-centered religion. If you go, I'm speaking in a broad picture here. If you go to a Buddhist thing, it will be mostly, at least here in the West, meditation halls, or here in Vedanta Society, study of Vedanta texts and philosophy and so on. So there are these differences. And both are recognized as perfectly all right in their own spheres in India. It's only when you come here, you have this problem. The same problem, if you go to a Buddhist and talk about the theistic forms of Hinduism, they have a 1,000-year debate with Buddhists. Their reaction is, yeah, all that is nice. They're very gentle people. So they'll smile and say it's nice, but it's a fairy tale at the end of the day. Where is this God of yours? Just make believe. You are just religions based on superstitions and fairy tales. All of it. Theistic Hinduism, all of Islam, Judaism, Christianity. Simple. Just listen to Christopher Hitchens, Sam Harris, Richard Dawkins. For 1 hour a day, for 1 month, it will cure you of religion. No, I mean, listen to the rabbi all day long and listen to Christopher Hitchens for 30 minutes or Richard Dawkins for 30 minutes, and you will begin to feel that Richard Dawkins is speaking more sense than the rabbi. It's difficult to prove the existence of God. That's why faith is essential. So the God-centered religions begin with faith and depend on faith. This is the reason why religion is called faith in this country. It's essential. To that extent, the religions like Buddhism, they don't begin, at least the spiritual component does not depend so much on faith. It's more on meditation, investigation, philosophy, and so on and so forth. So that's one angle. Yeah.
I want to ask you, though, from the perspective of the activism that we've been talking about, so given your typology of these two religions, which of these will have the better chance of cultivating service towards others?
I think the that-centered religion, the God-centered religions will have a better chance. However, I think that idea of service and social activism, the way we see it today, is a modern development. It was not really all that, I remember Houston Smith speaking about very nice introductory chapter on Hinduism, then follows it up with Judaism, and then contrasts. He makes a few remarks about the emphasis of justice in Judaism compared with Hinduism. I think all those conclusions are specious. If you go back 500 years, 1,000 years, 2,000 years back in the history of religions, it is a lot that we are reading from our post-enlightenment perspective into religions and claiming that our religions had all these ideas in the beginning and they practiced them. I mentioned the case of Christianity and slavery. Christianity was absolutely fine with slavery. Not one modern idea of how slavery could be wrong was neither Christ nor any of the apostles nor the church. There are many examples of them supporting slavery, especially in the last few hundred years, but never against it. So this is a modern movement and most welcome. Most welcome, by the way. I think religions, spiritualities, religions are evolving, and this is an expansion. This is not a misguided movement, by the way. And this is an expansion of spiritual cores, ideas, implicit ideas in the ancient spiritual traditions across the world religions. And this is a movement in the right direction, as long as we preserve the spiritual core of these religions. Yeah.
I thought of the other thing that I wanted to ask you without monopolizing things. It goes to the core of what you were speaking. I think you can develop a duality in religion, which gives a cultural definition of what evil is. An example is that in most recent times, when there was an invasion into Israel, a number of children were killed as you may know, killed in their cribs. And all sorts of things occurred. Some of these people perpetuated these things that were captured by the Israelis and later interrogated. And they asked them, is it all right in the religion of Islam to kill children in their cradles? He said, absolutely not. That's fundamentally in direct opposition of Muhammad. And they said, why did you do this? Well, this is all right. This is okay under Islam because these were my enemies. A 3-year-old was killed in her crib, was an enemy. So it shows a duality culturally developed in what you determine is evil and what isn't evil.
Yeah, again, the late sainted Christopher Hitchens, he said, good people will do good things, evil people will do evil things. In order to make a good person do evil, you need religion. So, yeah. And what we need to be careful about is, look, there will always be psychopaths. And an analyst said, often these people, they gravitate towards the police and the military and militant organizations because that gives them a free scope to exercise their proclivities. What we must take care to do is to prevent religion from being used to justify or even provide any kind of excuse. See, religion has failed in 2 levels. Religion has failed. As far as violence is concerned, religion has failed. One level is to prevent people from being violent towards others. That religion has not really succeeded. To some extent, it has succeeded. I mean, you would always have to think about what would have happened if religion were not there at all in the history of humanity. I believe religion is the source of civilization, basically. I strongly believe that. However, if it was meant to make people better and stop violence, it has had a very, very mixed success. That's the best report card you can give. So that's one level of failure. Worst level of failure is not only to stop, it had not prevented people from being violent towards each other. In some cases, it has justified and enabled people to be violent towards each other. So what we need to do right now is to stop religion from being used as a justification for violence. That's one thing that religious leaders all over the world can do. That will not stop violence, because violence has many, many other reasons. There are political reasons, ethnic reasons, economic reasons, all of military reasons, many things are there. But religion is one of the reasons. So that has to stop.
Namalia Majumdar asks, can you please explain the concepts of Vivata Vada and Parinama Vada?
All right, that's a technical question. But still, the question is very interesting and important in all religions of the world. It's the question of causality. How does the one become the many? Or to put it in theistic terms, how does God create the world? Or to put it in philosophical terms, how does cause become effect? What is causality? So that's the broad question. He mentioned two theories of causality. The ancient Indian philosophers were all very interested in this question. So from Brahman to this world, what's the link? How does it happen? Or does it happen at all? So that goes to the question of what is cause, what is effect, what kind of theory of causality do you subscribe to? Hindus were interested in it, Buddhists, Jains, and they developed multiple theories of causality. He has mentioned two. I'll just comment a little bit upon it and stop. So there is this verse. Arambhavada Karnabhaksha Paksha Sanghatavada Bhadanta Paksha Sankhyaadi Pakshastu Parinamavado Vedantavadastu Vedanta Pakshastu Vivartavada. What does it mean? It was written by one of the successors of Shankaracharya, next generation of Advaitic monks, Sarvagyatma Muni. There's a text called Sankshepa Shariraka, written about 1100 years ago. This verse means, is giving a list of theories of causality. The Nyaya Vaisheshika theory of causality was Arambhavada. In English, it will translate to emergence. The Buddhist theory of causality was Sanghatavada. How would you translate that? Collection of particles, a collection of elemental particles. Then the Sankhya and Yoga theories of causality were Parinamavada, which would translate to transformation theory. And the Vedanta, Advaita Vedanta theory of causation is Vivartavada, which is the appearance theory. What do these mean? If you see them, you will understand what they mean immediately. So the first one is emergence theory. The ancient Naiyayikas and Vaisheshikas, they said there are a mass of whirling particles and they come together to form stars and planets and people and beings and all of that. But that's like our school science. It is. It's amazing. It's 2,000 to 3,000 years ago. The first atomic theory, it came from the Vaisheshikas. Kanada, the founder of the Vaisheshika system, actually means, Kanada literally means atom eater. I think it must have been the first particle accelerator in the universe. So, yes, their ideas, the particles merge together and a new thing emerges, which was not there. So the particles which constitute the pot come together in a particular form and the pot emerges, and the pot is Arambha. It is a new product which was not there earlier. This is a very modern theory of causality. It's all pervasive in science. Emergence. So new systems emerge, new products emerge, which are not there in the constituent materials. That's one. In contrast to this and opposing this, the Buddhists, two schools of Buddhists, the Sautrantikas and Vaibhashikas, not the later Mahayana schools like the mind-only school and the emptiness school, not them, the earlier schools. They said, no, the pot doesn't emerge, nor does the world emerge. There are elemental particles, they whirl around and they arrange themselves in different patterns, and you think they give the illusion of a product. And they will go through a whole dialectic to show the pot or the table, for example, the table. The Vaisheshika will say the wood has been cut and shaped in such a way and a new product called table has emerged. product is the table. The Buddhist will say, where is this table? Whatever you point out is the wood. Is the table something apart from this? That's ridiculous. Is there something included somewhere inside this? That's ridiculous. So, I mean, the way they will show it, they will show that by no logical means can you prove that something called a table has emerged from the constituent particles. When the Sankhya philosophers came, Sankhya and Yoga philosophers, their theory of causation was transmutation or change. So they say that the cause itself becomes the effect. Not that something new emerges, not that nothing emerges. The cause itself is transformed into the effect. So milk is transformed into curd or yogurt. That's a classic example. The seed is transformed into the tree. Now, one might ask, so the essential insight is the product is in some sense already contained in the cause. So today we know in the DNA of the seed is contained the ultimate product, the tree. So the potential form, the effect in a potential form is already there in the cause. That is called parinamavada. Parinama simply means transformation. So these people say that it is Prakriti, it is nature which has transformed itself from a seed state into this universe. It's that same thing, but it has changed into this state. The Advaita Vedantins develop on this Parinamavada and they say nothing has transformed, it's more like a snake and a rope. That ultimate divine reality is still there and it appears as this universe. It is still Brahman right now and it appears as a world and as you and me and as God. So God, the world and us, all of us are appearances of one absolute reality which is already right now there. The only veil between that and us is ignorance, just as the only veil between the illusory snake and the real rope is ignorance of the real rope. That is called Vivartavada. By the way, as far as this world is concerned, as far as science is concerned, this world here, the non-dualists don't say that this is also an appearance. If you have yogurt, and if somebody asks for milk, give yogurt to that person and say that it only looks like yogurt, it's still milk. After all, we follow Vivartavada, the appearance theory of causality. No, that won't work. As far as the world is concerned, it is a transformation of Maya. So throughout, from Maya downwards to our world, it's all transformation theory. So these four theories, emergence theory, Sanghat, I trip over that one always, there's a translation which just makes things more difficult. Co-location of elementary particles theory. That's what it means. Then, aggregation, yes, aggregation of elementary particles, and no subsequent product, just aggregation. And then transformation of the cause into the effect, and appearance of the cause as the effect. And you can see all of them have their logic in them. So the question was Parinamavada and Vivartavada. So Parinamavada is the transformation theory and Vivartavada is the appearance theory. And the same author, Sankshepa Shariraka, says that Vedanta uses the Parinamavada theory. It subscribes to the Parinamavada theory in order to move on to the appearance theory. Parinamavada theory, I'll give you the original language, which is rather insulting. Parinamavada theory for inferior intellects. And when you are sharp enough, it's interesting. It says not sharp enough, and it says you are pure enough. When the mind is pure enough, then the appearance theory, then basically the thing is like saints everywhere. You just begin to see God everywhere. That's what basically happens. That's a good point to end upon. Would you agree, Rabbi?
I think I'd better not.
All right, let's do a peace chant. Om Shanti 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 Hari Om Tat Sat Shri Ram Krishna Arpanamastu. Happy Diwali, and may the blessings of Ma Kali and the Shekinah be upon all of us. I remember this few years back we celebrated Hanukkah and Diwali at the Indian consulate in New York together, and the Israeli consul general was there. And he said exactly what the rabbi said. He said, I meet people from the Jewish diaspora across the world. Here in New York, you find people from across the world. And they come to me with tales of the suffering and the histories of the communities in those countries, often difficult times they have gone through, except one country, and that's India. Except one country. No Jew from India has ever said that we ever faced persecution or. Yeah. All right, on that note, thank you very much, and a big hand to the Rabbi. One personal reminiscence about the Rabbi is, many years ago when I first met him, he had come to our main monastery in Belur Math, and that was the time of Durga Puja, the worship of Mother Durga in the image. So here is a rabbi, an Orthodox rabbi, and here is image worship in all. Durga Puja is the most ritualistic image worship that we have. And the interesting anecdote is this: he may not remember. He was there, I was there, and thousands of people and hundreds of monks. A friend of mine, one of the most brilliant people I know, an eminent mathematician, a monk. So he is very non-ritualistic. So in the middle of the puja somewhere, he just got up and was walking away. And the rabbi said to him, so here's a rabbi, an Orthodox rabbi speaking to a Hindu monk, you should go and sit there. Don't go away. I remember, again, I don't think he'll remember. What struck me about him was he was staying in our guest house at Belur Math, and we were walking around in the grounds of the monastery. It's getting dark, and the road to the guest house is dark. So I asked him, I was concerned. I was supposed to look after him because Swami Sarvapriyananda asked me to show him around Belur Math. So I asked him, will you be able to find your way back to the guest house? And he told me, I still remember, it struck me so much. He said, if I don't, I'll sleep on the streets. So many poor people sleep on the streets here.
I said that?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah. I still remember that. That really touched me. But he did find his way back to the guest house. Thank you.